First of all, thank you so much for coming on, man. This is really an honor to be able to talk to you.
My
My
pleasure.
audience will definitely love it to hear more from you. And for everyone who doesn't know you, what's your background and who are you and what do you do?
I am a composer. My name is Jason Graves. I've been writing music for pretty much any sort of media out there for about the last 25 years. Started out in film and TV in Los Angeles, like way back in the late 90s. And for about the last 20 plus years, I've been doing a lot of work in games, but also have been writing music for film and television and trailers and library music and, a little bit of everything. But I'd say 80% of my work has been in games.
Yes, and some big hitters as well. You wrote music for sure.
I think
Um,
let's like Tomb Raider, Dead Space, Far Cry, Call of Duty, of course. Those are probably the bigger titles that people would probably go, "Oh, I've played that before."
yes, exactly. So I myself, I'm not a gamer, but I love to see gameplays on YouTube, and I'm always amazed how. I mean, I tried a little bit of implementing music into games and all that stuff. What I would love to do, this is for my own benefit for sure, to know how you like. We're talking about your recently released soundtrack for Modern Warfare, Call of Duty,
Right.
and I'm wondering to get to the point to actually release a soundtrack for a game like this. What's your process like from the beginning to the end? I mean, if you're happy to share this, I would love to hear how it came about, how the first meetings and stuff like that. I think this would be very interesting for me, but also for the audience listening in, because this is like, yeah,
Sure. Just in terms of what it takes to get the soundtrack itself released.
uh, like the whole process. Basically, did they approach you for like making the
Oh,
music
okay,
for the
sure.
game? I would love to hear it, because this is,
Yeah,
I think, when you go into the nitty gritty of this stuff, I think this is very, yeah, interesting and much appreciated for sure.
totally.
Experts.
Totally. I think this is the kind of thing too that I mean, this is a big franchise, but it
Mhm.
all comes down to just kind of people that people that I know, and relationships that I have. And hopefully it's something that everyone can kind of relate to because everyone knows people.
Mhm.
So
That's
what
true.
happened was I actually didn't know the people at Infinity Ward, which is the game company that made Modern Warfare 2 and by extension all the Warzone stuff from the last year. However, I did know Jonathan Mayer, who has a company called Spider Farm Productions, and he is the one that did all the music implementation and mixing for Modern Warfare 2. I worked with Jonathan through association more than directly working with him when he was at Sony like 12 years ago on this game called The Order 1886. And I only met him a couple of times, but we just hit it off immediately. I mean, it helped. He was very complimentary of my music, so of course I was incredibly thankful for that. But he just seemed like such a cool, down to earth kind of guy, and we kept in touch and saw each other at conferences, but never really had the chance to work together until Modern Warfare 2. So I did additional music from the release that came out last year and coordinated all the music production with Jonathan, and just we got a good pipeline going. And through that experience with Jonathan, I got to know Steven, the audio director,
Mhm.
who then said, "Hey, why don't we get Jason to do Warzone?" Because they really liked my music from Modern Warfare 2. And it was just like I got my foot in the door because I knew someone, and a lot of times that's 99% of the battle is just
Yeah.
having an established relationship with people, even if it goes back to 2012, right? It's like 13, 11 years later. Um, those kind of relationships really do pay off.
Yeah.
And that was just at the beginning of an incredibly fun, exciting, and surprisingly like inspirational and freeing composing bout that I did for
Wow.
Warzone over the last,
Mhm.
I don't know, 10 months or so.
Mhm.
I would think, having not worked on a big title like this myself, I would think there'd be a lot of scrutiny of all the cues, and everything would be really meticulously taken care of, and there'd be super specific feedback about things, and just not a lot of flexibility. That's just not because I heard anything, just because that just seemed to me a game that big. They would be really particular about everything,
Hmm.
and they are. However, I found out that we just matched and meshed so
Mm.
well. The writing style that I have being a drummer, which is a little more of a kind of like chain of consciousness writing. I think because I'm a drummer, I intentionally don't write like in 4 bar phrases where you can tell where the sections are. And yes,
Yes.
there's a 5 chord, but maybe it's a 5 suspended and it takes an extra couple of bars, or it ends up being shorter. And I sort of like subverting expectations in terms of phrasing and rhythm and the way I kind of layer things for interactivity, which is usually doing more than really needs to be done. So you would never play all of the music that I wrote in one go.
Right.
This is all the music, and then it kind of gets stretched out like this.
Hmm.
Just that's how I've been doing it for a really long time, probably the last 10 years. And that just meshed really well with what they needed for Modern Warfare. It was just sort of, even our first talk, everyone was just so happy to be working with everybody else, myself working with them working with me. And Jonathan had some musician suggestions if he thought that I would be open to it. Of course I
Hmm.
was. And I
Yeah,
had some
always.
musician suggestions if they were
Hmm.
open to it. Of course they were.
Hmm.
So we used 3 live musicians plus myself and a couple of odd string players on the Warzone soundtrack. And everything that I sent, it was just like, sent in a track, and they loved it, and they wanted me
Yeah.
to do another one, and I did that, and they loved it, and they wanted me to do another one. There were never any corrections or changes.
Wow.
It
Amazing.
was
Congrats,
just
man.
kind of like
That's awesome. Yeah.
they just said, this is just so great. We didn't think it would get even better. This cue's even like more what we need than the previous one was. So it was
Wow.
just a blast, a real blast to work
That's
on.
it seems like too good to be true most of the time, I think. If they say, great, we don't need any changes, I'm always like cautious and say, okay, maybe they come back after the weekend and say, oh, maybe my wife said this and my kids said this. But yeah, it's great for you, man, that it worked this way. But if you have this connection with like, if you understand what they want from you from the get go, and they have you understand the words that they're saying in terms of musical input, that's a good starting point for sure. Yeah.
Having common ground, I think, went a
Mm-hmm.
long way. And I
Mm-hmm.
already had established, I'd worked on a film with Jonathan before Modern Warfare 2. So we already has established sort of like a delivery pipeline and like how things needed to be stemmed out and the way the mixes needed to work. And it was a very intuitive process, but we had like a year of experience doing this behind us. So it was just a natural next step
Mm-hmm.
to work on Warzone.
Sounds like.
And just
Mhm.
I mean, so much fun. I hope people enjoy the soundtrack because it was just all these things that I would do, even in the very first track, which I'm pretty sure the soundtrack's chronological. Like the first track I wrote
Okay.
for Warzone is the first track on the CD soundtrack. I just did these fun things like dropping beats and doing crazy synth things and just really big over the top kind of drums. And I thought, this is going to be way too much. They don't want something like this big, but I'm just going to do it because it's so much fun. Maybe we'll be able to keep some of it. And they kept all of it. And every
Wow.
track was like that.
That's awesome. But I wanted to go
Yeah.
back to the relationship thing. I mean, you have this relationship with Jonathan. You said from 2012 on,
Yeah.
like you just knew
Hmm.
him this, and even then, before then, I think this connection to Jonathan also came from another connection. So it's basically you have to start somewhere to build this relationship base to get to a point where you actually get connected to these big players. And of course, you have to deliver on what you promise and all that. But yeah, I think the relationship thing is really important. And my question to this would be how do you go about how I mean probably from 20 years ago, how did you make your first connection to anyone in this industry? Was this from an agent, or was this like through some film work you did, or how did this did you go out like to meetings or events or something?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think Jonathan is a good example of this. When I knew
Hmm.
Jonathan in 2011 or 2012, he wasn't in the position of authority that he is now. He was, I don't remember exactly what he was doing, but I think he was like an audio editor for Sony or something like that
Hmm.
because we were both 12 years younger. So we're kind of like late, mid to late 30s and sort of both career wise in the same sort of place. And I think it's important for any composer to basically just make friends with all of your competition. Now, Jonathan was not my competition. He wasn't a composer, but he
Yeah.
does write music and he has synthesizers and we talk about music all the time. But I don't really consider any of the composers in my field competition. They're just friends.
Hmm.
And the same would go for any audio directors that I know. And a lot of the audio directors, even the ones I'm working with now, weren't audio directors when I first
Yeah.
met them. I am terrible at marketing myself and like schmoozing and like, hey, I'm Jay, yeah, here's my card or whatever. You know, back in the day, we were passing out CDs and things. I
Hmm.
hated it. I only did it one time when my agent set something up and said, go out there and it was just an hour where I thought, if I have to do this on a regular basis, I'm just going to change careers because
Not for you.
I felt so fake, right?
Actually.
So I've always been more in the mind of making friends. And if there ends up being some sort of a business music connection outside of just like talking about things that we love about music or people that we've
Yeah.
worked with or movies that we saw or games that we played, if there's a business connection that ends up precipitating down the road, then that's great. But the worst case scenario is I just made a new friend. And a lot of times, especially with composers, we help each other out all the time. I can think of 5 or 6 different composers right now that are all working on huge games and they might be super busy, but if I needed a musician recommendation, for example, or I knew they played something that was really cool, or they had an instrument that I couldn't get a hold of, oh,
Hmm.
hey, could you just record something for me real quick? Or I'll get calls as well. Just need some crazy cool percussion, like 60 seconds. Is there something that you could do? And we help each other out. And a lot of times these composers end up being, audio directors, or they're super busy and they need help. I've gotten last minute calls for anything from Star Wars to Assassin's Creed to Modern Warfare, like years ago, where it was just like, I'm so under the gun and I can't physically finish this music.
Hmm.
Can you help in the next like 10 days? And
Hmm.
it's just nice having that sort of a safety net. Because, of course, we all want to write the music ourselves. If someone's asking me to do it, I want to be able to do it all myself. But there's also real life and, issues pop up and you get
Right.
sick or deadlines move or they ask for more music. And those are just all the side effects having
Yeah.
that sort of a thing. The first thing
Hmm.
is I can call, Austin Wintory or Jesper Kidd or Enon Zur or The Flight. I can call all these people or text them. I can text them and be like, hey, what's going on? Like if I stop by in their city, we'll just hang out because it's very much
Hmm.
a commiseration, misery loves company. Like, oh my gosh, yes, I'm under this deadline and I had these notes you wouldn't believe. And camaraderie, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a very good point that you're making, that you have to see them as, or I mean, this is actually what I think is helpful for everyone in any business. You have to love the people you work with and you work for, and to see it more as a collaboration, of course. But yeah, don't just do it because it makes money. Don't just do it because it sounds cool on a resume or something. You have to be able to. I mean, 10 months is a long time. If you don't like these people, it's really hard to work together, right? If it clicks like this, and I hear already people saying, okay, but you're already there. You're already in this position where you can actually choose. I'm not sure if this is true, but people will say that. And I'm like, okay, I would ask you, what would you say to someone who is just going to start out for in game music? What should they do if they don't like handing out CDs and don't like these events and rather be in the studio making music? What should they do?
The catch 22 with that question is anyone that you ask it, you're going to get 1,000 different answers because what
Mhm.
everyone's doing is looking back to their previous history of what they've
Yeah,
done, and that's the advice they're going to give. So that's what you're going to get from me is
absolutely.
kind of what I've done. Here's what I think based on my experience. The first thing you need to do is you need to, this is like such an obvious thing, but you need to be able to compose some sort of like engaging, unique kind of music. Now I'm saying
Mhm.
that first because that's the hardest thing in the world to do. I struggled even halfway through my career to sort of figure out like what kind of music that I was wanting to focus on, because even when I first started in games, it was like historical kinds of games like sword and sandals fighting or World War II fighter planes, and was this
Mhm.
kind of like orchestral throwback cinematic sort of thing. And it was fun, but I sort of felt like I was just kind of copying like what, John Williams or Hans Zimmer would have done. And it was just because I was working on a lot of them were movie tie-in games. So it was like Hans Zimmer was doing
Mhm.
the music for the movie, I was doing the music for the game. So I really felt like I was just doing a shadowy, lamer version of what Hans Zimmer would have done. And it wasn't until 2006 when I finally got the Dead Space game, the first Dead Space game. I was embracing, just because of the nature of the title, more of what kind of makes me me. I can say that in retrospect now, because I'm a drummer, like I mentioned
Mhm.
earlier. Being a drummer, I think I defaulted once I was out of school of just studying orchestration, counterpoint, chord progressions, and melody arcs. I felt like I was of limited knowledge because my upbringing was all about rhythm and beats and time signature changes and like metric modulation and all this stuff that I felt like didn't really lend itself to what I needed to do as a career. Friends who were a piano player or a sax player or a string player, especially like multi-part recording themselves doing all this stuff, and just like, I can play a drum for you. And they're like, oh, we got drum machines.
Exactly.
But as a result of this rhythm kind of thing, what, 6 years, 7 years into my career, I got this horror game, and there was no prerequisites. There were no specifics, no instructions given, other than they just wanted it to be really, really, really scary. Actually, I think they said the scariest music like ever written in the history of the world, some small achievement like that.
Mhm.
And I spent a lot of time kind of deconstructing music and figuring everything out. And I realized that if you take away the melody and you take away the harmony, and you also sort of take away a constant sense of predictable rhythm,
Mhm.
that's what really throws people off, because there's nothing that your brain can latch onto. So I
Right.
ended up using these metric modulating, multiple time signatures, crazy rhythms. It's like the basis of the entire score. So strings were sort of a natural extension to me, but also being a drummer, I could do rhythms or not do rhythms and just
Mhm.
play them like they were a percussion instrument.
Yeah.
All this is going back to what I grew up knowing, which is drums
Mhm.
and keyboards and guitars and playing in bands. I mean, I played keyboards in a blues band and bass in like a pop cover band. And drummer mentality is why that score for the first Dead Space and the sequels thereafter sounds the way it did.
Mhm.
And I'm assuming why it got the notoriety and attention that it did, because a drummer had not written a horror score
No.
like that before.
Right.
And I realized once that score came out that I was really playing to my strengths for that, even though the entire time I felt like I was like not knowing what was going on. I was going to fall on my face at any point in time. Huge imposter
Uh-huh.
syndrome.
Mhm.
I could talk to an hour about Dead Space and the sequels, but in the end, the score ended up coming together, thank goodness. And I learned so much, musically speaking and technically speaking, with recording the orchestra and all that, but more importantly, just personally, like, actually, you know what? It's okay that I'm a drummer. Actually, it's kind of cool that I'm a drummer, because I do know some other people that are composers that are also drummers, but most of them are not. They're keyboard players or guitarists, or they played a brass instrument in high school, but
Mhm.
now they do mostly stuff in the computer. And I've always been very percussion oriented and very performative oriented. Like, I play, like really play. That's why there's microphones kind of
Yeah.
everywhere. I've got keyboards and
Yes.
instruments back there. And I really love the sound of live instruments,
Mhm.
even if it's a solo instrument. I'd rather hear something made of live recordings of real players and have it be a 8 or 10 piece group of players
Hmm.
than kind of simulated MIDI orchestra when it's going to be like a horror game or something.
Yeah.
We're not trying to do epic superhero music. Just if you're given the choice to do something, I always
Yeah.
lean towards as much live as
Hmm.
possible. But that's also falling back on another one of my strengths, which is just strumming, plucking, bowing, basically anything not wind oriented. I played in all those things in college 30 years
Hmm.
ago. The steel drum band, the African ensemble band, the Mideast ensemble band, the electronic music ensemble, everything. Celtic ensemble,
Wow.
drums, and that's what I
Yeah.
do still. I'm doing
Yeah.
all of those things. So
Hmm.
what seems like a supernatural progression now, looking backwards, wasn't so obvious the first 20
Mm.
years. And, maybe me pontificating about all of this can help some other composers think, oh, well, I feel
Mhm.
that way too, because I only know how to play violin. We all feel insecure about whatever our
Yeah.
history, our background, our experience is. I say lean into it
Yeah.
and make it your own, because you are the only one of you out there, and your
Totally.
experiences and your musical experience, your personal experience, the bands or ensembles you've played in, the instruments that you own, you're the only one that has all of that. And the more you lean into it, the better chance you have of making that kind of original music that I
Yeah.
mentioned. Um, it's
I mean,
easier for
it's
me now, but
yeah,
back
100%. I
then
mean,
it wasn't as obvious.
yeah. I mean, this is probably the biggest thing that holds people back when they're
Yeah.
trying to get into the industry. I mean, what you see on Facebook or Instagram, everything went digital. You just have all these soundtracks in your ear or everywhere all the time. And then you hear something, you hear Hans Zimmer or you hear other composers and say, okay, this is just like the same as this. So it's very
Mm-hmm.
hard, as you said in the beginning, answering this question, to find your own uniqueness in how you write music is the hardest one and the biggest one, I think, too. But then if you, I mean, you get this over time. I don't think it's possible to do this like, okay, now today I'm going to be me and I'm doing what I can best. I think this is practice and like just like finding yourself in the music that you're producing. And yeah, what would be the next thing? Like be unique in your music and like be really good at that. And then what else should someone do that would start today?
I know my first, you know, 5 to 10 years of musical journey was basically studying every orchestral score I could get my hands on and just copying it as closely as I could,
Mm.
orchestration wise. I
Mhm.
was really big into learning about orchestra. And back then, the samples, I mean, I had an external sampler with 128
Yes,
megabytes.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah, and I custom cut all my orchestra samples up so I could get more first violin versus second violin samples and all this crazy stuff. But I knew everything about it.
Hmm.
And I've got still notebooks back there of all the magazines and all the books that I bought. I mean, probably 5 shelves of books. Anything from general recording things to mixing things and how compressors work and different kinds of EQs. This was before YouTube, so there's more knowledge out there now, but I would still stress
Hmm.
books are kind of hard to beat
Yeah.
because the information's right there, instantly available, and maybe you can augment that with some great YouTube channels. There's a lot of really good ones out there, but I sort of lose patience because a lot of times with the YouTube channels, they kind of have to cover all the bases and you end up watching something for 20 minutes and it's like, okay, well, I sort of heard about all that before.
Yeah.
So while I was studying music and writing music practically every day, at least 5 days a week, even when I didn't have a job, I would spend 2 or 3 hours a day and work on something, whether it was an orchestral mock-up or, I mean, literally, I didn't have any work and it was just like, oh, you know what? I've never done a Caribbean funk kind of thing. What would that be like? So
Yeah.
I get a friend to play saxophone to come in and I play a steel drum and some drum set and use some synthesizers. And that was my week of music. So I wrote all this really awful music that ended up going in a library somewhere that I'm still
Yeah.
getting royalties for. Library music is not what it was back then. So don't ask me about library music. I don't have any idea. Even if I wasn't getting royalties for them, I was learning with every new
Right.
song, every new genre I was trying, every new instrument. Like I was just trying alternate tunings on my guitar so I could play different kinds of chords and how to mic it. Put the mic here, stand
Hmm.
back. What different microphones should I use? All these things obsessively. At night, my wife's reading a book and I'm reading an orchestral score, but I'm actually making more noise. I'm going, oh, and she's like, what are you, look,
What's
I'm like,
going
he did
on?
a,
Wow,
it's
that's
actually
awesome.
a major seven, but there's no root. I didn't realize that in the French horns. Just obsessive. And
Hmm.
I only mention this because it's okay to not be obsessive. But occasionally I get emails from people that say, "Oh, I was thinking that it might be fun to write music for games." And I'm like, "You're thinking it might be fun. I can tell you right now that's not gonna happen. If you're
Yeah.
thinking that it might be fun." I always wanted to do music, not necessarily
Mhm.
for games, because it wasn't as much of a goal in the late 90s, but I wanted to write music for film or TV or commercials or
Mhm.
something. And that was my end goal, music slash audio for whatever I could get paid to do.
Mhm.
I was recording voiceovers. I was recording politicians for commercials like,
Mhm.
my name's Jason and I paid for this ad. I was recording bands like on the weekends and in the evenings. I had like 5 microphones and we record an instrument at a time. It was just like everything I could get my hands on, especially when I was young and just married and no kids and my wife was working, was just absorb, 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 absorb. So just hopefully by natural extension, I was learning more. And the music I
Yeah.
was writing hopefully was getting like slightly better crafted.
Mhm.
And whether I realized it or not, that calypso funk tune ended up influencing some other thing I did 3 months later. Because I was like, I remember I was listening to that one calypso funk tune and it had this cool chord progression. I ended up using that for an orchestra thing, but with the orchestration that Williams had from the brass, in the main title of the Star Wars, or feathers in your cap. It's like I'm answering your question by babbling a lot, but it's important
No, no. I
to
mean, it's very.
dedicate, right?
Mhm.
Like you want to be in this
Yeah.
field, but I feel like it's very narrow minded to think I want to be a game composer. That's sort of like an actor saying, "I want to be a TV star," or
Yeah.
I want to do commercials for a living." Like an actor can do
Mhm.
film or TV or stage. Like they're all different experiences, and composers are the exact same way. Don't get me wrong, I love them, but the library music thing or film and TV stuff. I mean, even things for online things now. It's like don't sell yourself short. The
Right.
more open-minded you are about your final goals, I think the less chance that you're going to feel disappointed because you've cast your net a
Yeah.
lot wider than being super specific.
Yeah. Exactly. So I think what you're saying is the obsessive part of this means basically in today's world, it means just stop watching Netflix at night. Just work on your skill and just become. I mean, obsession. It can be good, I think, to at least for a while, like get into the weeds of what you want to do to actually
Mm-hmm.
find out what you actually want to do. If you see, okay, game composing, it sounds great, right? This is why people are writing you like this and say, it might be fun. But it goes so much into it. In every part of this industry goes so much until you get to the point where it actually can be fun. And I think, yeah, so I think obsession is important, even if it only means you skip a night of Netflix or whatever to work on your craft, right?
Healthy obsession with boundaries.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Basically, be unique in what you're composing and then just get better at what you do, right? You said yourself, this is hard. You don't like it to this day, or did it change a little bit? If you come into a room and to like an event, everyone recognizes you. If it's game related, it's probably easier to talk. Maybe you don't have to do any marketing for yourself at this point.
Says the
How
person
did this
interviewing
first?
me on a podcast doing marketing. this
True,
isn't
but
like,
but that's the thing. I mean, yeah,
marketing, but
can,
yeah,
yeah, it is in the end, absolutely. And you have people that work for you that do this stuff and find out the stuff for you, which is great. But marketing doesn't have to be like going to event awkwardly and standing at with people and talking to them. It's more like be the problem solver that they're looking for in your market, whatever you want to accomplish. And this comes back to what you said. The goal can be very much broader than just game composer. A game composer in itself is very broad because you can be a game composer and don't make any money from it. There's so many games out there that don't pay anything for music. So yeah, that's really good advice. Probably not the answer people want to hear, but I think it's very important to say that from a veteran like you to be like what actually is important in this industry to do. Cool.
if people don't know who you are, they can't hire you. So
Yeah.
you need to have some sort of an online presence, right?
Right.
Like I was just at a game company yesterday, friends that I've known for a really long time, and they were telling me about just someone we're going to be interviewing and possibly hiring. And they said that they found out about them because someone else recommended them because they were friends, and that this person they were considering hiring had a website. And they went to the
Mm-hmm.
website, and he
Awesome.
said it was all like so great.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, as old fashioned as websites are, I still have one because I like the idea of people being able to Google and not just go to like my IMDb page or, whatever
Mm-hmm.
else is out there collecting data on me. I can sort of curate the things on the website and have specific titles, specific music. I think, especially when you're starting, it's important to have accessibility without being in everybody's face all the time. Hey, everybody, check out this track I just did. Peace out. And that's all you put on social media. Like, you need to
Yeah.
engage people other ways first. Here's a great example.
Mm-hmm.
I was working on this game like 2 years ago, and I needed someone to do like some vocals, like some male vocals, but also like possibly a tagelharpa or a violin or a cello or something. And I had literally just, my YouTube page had been populated with Colin McGuinness, who's a composer, but also a singer and multi-instrumentalist who has, I don't even know how many people, lots of followers on YouTube. And I watched one of his videos and I was like, that's really cool. He seems like he's having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, I should totally ask Colin if he would be interested. And so I emailed him, and he ended up doing some stuff for me. And sadly, the game ended up getting canceled. But then fast forward
Mm-hmm.
another 2 years, and I saw him at GDC since then. Like, he's a super nice guy, really funny, very, very personable. He doesn't shove things in your face or ask if you've listened to his music. He's just hanging out, being Colin. Very much reminds me of me at these conferences where it's just like, hey, what's going on? Oh, hey, let's go get
Mm-hmm.
something to eat. Like, talk shop, but not about, it's personal connections. And another game came
Yeah.
up and I needed something. And I ended up emailing him, and now he's doing like lots of stuff for me.
Mm-hmm.
And he has an interesting story as well, because he did the singing
That's
thing on
awesome.
YouTube because he was trying to compose music, but he wasn't getting a lot of traction with it. So in parallel, he started putting these YouTube videos on, and then that ended up taking off. And he said, I didn't think I was going to be doing that. I really kind of wanted to do more music, but now he's doing more music as a result of getting the exposure from the YouTube things.
This,
So
mm,
I'm not telling
yeah.
everyone to make a YouTube video singing and playing instruments, but again, that's Colin's strength. He fell back on his
Right.
strengths and does these things, and his production's like really, really
Mm,
great. I think he literally turned 30 today, actually. So that's a younger person. That's
wow.
their sort of, small, abbreviated, my interpretation of his journey. But you have
Yeah.
to have some sort of a presence online so that people, if they search for you, they land somewhere. Or
Right.
if you end up having like TikTok or SoundCloud or YouTube or something, and they see something, and then a week later they see something else, or 6 months later they're like, what was that thing that I saw? It's like being subtle. Like, you're just sort of like, hey, my thing, and you're walking away. And if someone hears it, great. And if not, not a big deal, because you got another thing that you're going to be doing in another
Right.
couple of weeks.
Right.
But it's the
Right. So,
long term, like,
mm,
marathon
Hmm.
of years of doing things like this. It's not a sprint where you're going to get sudden, it's like a
Hmm.
long, slow, painful process, but
Yeah.
in the best way possible.
Yes, exactly. I mean, this plays really well in the first 2 points you made. You have to have this presence. What he was doing is he played into his strength and had his unique sound and his unique ability to compose things or arrange or produce things. And this is how he got jobs and then now finally can do what he wanted to do. This isn't the perfect. That's awesome. I didn't know this story. This is really, really cool. So yeah, it doesn't really matter if you have like 100 or 10,000 subscribers on YouTube or your website gets like these many visits. It just depends. I think this is also plays into all of this is that you continually like put stuff out there. And as you said, not just showing off all the time, but like giving something and yeah, being like helpful to people. I think this is really, really good. Awesome. Yeah. What kind of game did he work on with you? Can you say that?
And
Okay.
sworn to secrecy, as most
Yeah.
games end up being.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So we are still in the first part of your journey with Modern Warfare. You composed the music. This all worked really well. You said there was not much questions about changes and all that stuff. So and then you finished the soundtrack and it goes to mixing. And Jonathan mixed it. Then was it? Yeah, and implemented
Yep.
it.
So
Okay.
I did my pass of mixing, but
Mm-hmm.
ultimately I end up sending all the tracks. We had three live musicians. Azam and Loga are a husband wife team that she
Mm-hmm.
sings. So all the vocals you hear are her. Loga plays a bunch of things, but he mostly did electric guitar, viol, and some acoustic guitar. Tom Straley is a guitarist that I use all the time in Los Angeles. Most of the guitars you hear are him, but they all gave me so many tracks of so many different options that a lot of times I would just double down on things. So what you hear on the soundtrack isn't
Mm-hmm.
really like what I delivered. It's more like a soundtrack presentation. With game
Mm-hmm.
music, a lot of times, I made this sort of
Yeah.
like thinning out of the stems. I just like over saturating things and giving developers more options. So if you Google, you know, Modern Warfare 2 Warzone lobby music for any of the 6 seasons or multiplayer menu map or anything like that, it's
Mm-hmm.
probably like three or four of the 50 stems that I would
Wow.
send to Jonathan, and they would mix everything. But by mixing, a lot of it was just muting lots of things. So it worked really well as load-in music or lobby music, but also they used it in the game. It'd be like the
Mm-hmm.
more upbeat version would be in the game, right? The more action-oriented stems would
Mm-hmm.
be what would go under gameplay. The more like
Yeah.
chilling or like slight anticipatory vibe would be what goes into the menu. But yes,
Mhm.
Jonathan did all the implementation as well as the mixing. And
Wow.
then for the soundtrack, we also had it mastered, which was nice because I haven't had anything mastered in probably 15 years. I just do it all myself.
Okay. That's awesome. And you said that the soundtrack itself is like the what you on Spotify or wherever people go and listen to their stuff. This is what you send to the developer, right? Before implementing it in the game. These are basically are they
Right.
more fleshed out or are they like cut down or how does this work
Yeah,
from?
like slightly more cut down and extended a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. A lot of times there just be multiple, like we don't need two or three different lead vocal lines from
Mm-hmm.
Azam or different reverb sends and
Mm-hmm.
different effects. It was just things that I would provide as options for Infinity Ward by
Mm-hmm.
way of Jonathan. And I think everyone always likes options. We've sort of quickly fell into a groove of like that more is more. Especially Tom would play guitars.
Yeah.
He'd give me 6 or 7 different guitar parts, all kind of doing the same thing, but they were different guitars in different registers. A lot of times I just end up using all of them. Some of them pan this way, some of them super, super
Mm-hmm.
wide, and like the ones in the middle would be more telephone EQE, and the wider it got, like the more open the frequency response would be from the guitars. And you kind of hear like probably all 6 of these guitars like doing their thing, and it just sounds like a wide
Wow.
guitar soundstage in the soundtrack. But in the game, you know, it'd be just this one guy in the middle on the main menu, like ding, 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 ding,
I
ding,
see.
ding, ding. And then you got this cool singing and like me playing some percussion or something.
Hmm. But this also involves a lot of trust. If you just give Jonathan all your stuff open, and he's basically can do whatever. I don't know if you were in the mixing sessions and stuff like that, but it sounds like you both knew exactly what you wanted the soundtrack to, or the game soundtrack to sound like, so he could fulfill your vision, or both of your visions and the vision of the developer.
Totally. I think in the best possible scenario, and it's the same way with my friend Barney at Supermassive Games, who I've known for 12 years now. I've worked on all the Dark Pictures games with him, and Until Dawn was our first title. But in the best relationships I've found, it's like a good marriage where the two spouses are basically tripping over each other to make sure the other one is getting everything that they need.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way Stephen and Jonathan and myself, or Barney and myself, it's always like, well, I'm going to give you this. Is that okay? Well, yes, yes, yes. And here's how we did the mix. Is the mix okay? Well,
Mm-hmm.
sure. I love the mix. I mean, do you love the mix? It's like, it's a lot of everybody's so happy because everybody else is so happy. However, we're also all probably about the same age, and we've all known each other for a long time, and we all have lots of
Mm-hmm.
similar like backgrounds and music things that we like, and we have references that we're sort of aligned on in terms of vibe, and there's relationship there. There's shorthand and a lot of things that we can talk about. I mean, guitar pedals or synthesizers or microphone techniques on the strings or on the percussion, and lots of fun, geeky stuff that
Yes.
makes all those decisions down the road about the mix, about the intent or the tone of a particular track so much easier to talk about, which
Mm-hmm.
is why it's so great to have all that front ended with people that you end up meeting and becoming friends with,
Yeah.
because you're establishing that line of trust, even if you don't
Mm-hmm.
realize it. You know, your favorite, I mean, it's always guitar pedals for me because I'm just, they're like candy, basically. But
Yeah.
guitar pedals or synthesizers or microphones, you know, talking about that, or even just styles of music or a soundtrack that came out, types of film that you like, you're like aligning and kind of vibing with people that way, even if you don't
Mm-hmm.
realize it. And more importantly, they're doing the same thing with you. You know,
Yeah.
it's just
That's awesome.
establishing like a relationship, being friends, hanging out. It's not complicated. It just takes time.
It takes time. Yeah. And it sounds like fun too. So you get
Oh, it's
there
so much
at some
fun.
point. Yeah. You get there in game music that you can have fun. But there's a grind before it comes before, like a lot. I think you have to think long term. This is nothing that happens overnight. Even though some of the composers you hear on films or shows or games, they
Yeah.
had their fair share of grinding, yeah, and
Yeah.
coffee and all that stuff. Did you ever have you ever been an intern in the studio or with any big composer, or have you just did it all by yourself?
No, I was always on my own. I mean, I guess it was by choice, but not intentionally. I was in Los Angeles for a couple of years working with another composer. I
Hmm.
was writing stuff and he was writing stuff. And sometimes we would write things together, like we would both submit two different versions of the same piece for a commercial or something. But I decided that I would rather, I'm from North Carolina, I would rather
Hmm.
move back home to North Carolina and do indie film music or just do music on the side for fun than kind of do this corporate grind that was not creatively very
Yeah.
fulfilling. And that was 25 years ago. So I sort of started from scratch, from the
Hmm.
ground up in North Carolina, like in 98, I guess.
Hmm.
And that's been my whole thing since then, is just me by myself, which is why I do so many things. It's out of necessity because there's no one else around. I can't
Hmm.
just, you know, throw it on a drive and go around the corner to a mix engineer like you could in Los Angeles because there's
Yeah.
no one here. I'm on 30 acres of woods and I'm an hour away from a major city or a recording studio. So it's been self-preservation, which is why I mix all my own things and master all
Hmm.
my own things. And I'm also a little OCD and like learning. So it
Yeah.
all works out.
I love it because lots of people ask if you need to be in LA or need to be in these big cities to make it, and you're proof that it's not necessary. It can be done even from the middle of nowhere. This is awesome. Yeah, I mean, this would be my dream as well. I don't need to be in a big city. If it works otherwise, that's fine. That's absolutely cool. Yeah, that's awesome. It's also a good place to grow up, to grow your kids. So that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, we love it out here.
That's really, really good. Yeah, man. So everyone who's on here and seeing this, check out Jason's new soundtrack that's on Spotify, and I think probably everywhere else. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 Warzone. It was really a pleasure talking to you, man. You stay connected. If there's anything else coming up, I'm happy to chat again. Do you have any last things that you want to say?
I would love to mention that if anyone listens to the soundtrack, I would love for everyone to listen to it because I'm incredibly proud of it. However, it is literally like 4 people recording themselves at home. Like that's the soundtrack. Even the strings are, I played strings on the first 3 or 4 tracks myself here in the studio. I had 2 other musicians do strings, just like 5 passes of violin 1, 5 passes of violin 2, just solo strings, stacking them up in a couple of the other tracks as well. But it was still them either here or in their house recording themselves. All the synths are all my synths and drum machines, and I did a lot of the percussion, but it's still like 5 people in their bedrooms basically recording this music. Hopefully that's inspirational. The fact that something like 5 people with microphones getting on a modern warfare soundtrack, I think that's pretty cool. It's a testament to technology, but I think it's also a testament to the musicians that played on the score. If I can do it, anyone can do it. Just get your friends to record stuff for you. Even if you're just, recording with your phone. Live music speaks.
It's absolutely. I mean, that's amazing, man. I didn't know that it was just these 5 musicians. That's really encouraging, I think, for everyone that's listening to this or watching it. And thank you so much for this, and be inspired, everyone. And thank you so much, Jason, and have a great rest of your day. Keep in touch. Talk soon.
See you soon.
Okay. Thank you, Jason. See you soon.